The wind cuts across the cliff face like a blade. 1,500 feet below, the valley floor spreads out in shadow. Up here, where the air thins and the stone turns cold, something impossible clings to the mountainside. A fortress, not at the base of the mountain, not on a gentle slope. Here, suspended between earth and sky, built from stones that each weigh more than 3 men. No roads lead to this place. No cranes touched these walls. And yet, someone built it. Someone carried water up these cliffs. Someone laid each stone so perfectly that 8 centuries later, not even a knife blade fits between them. The question isn't just how they did it. It's how they did it without leaving a trace of the method behind. In the medieval world, survival meant altitude. When armies swept through valleys, burning crops and enslaving populations, the only refuge was vertical. Fortresses built at ground level could be sieged, starved, and breached. But a fortress in the sky? That was a different equation entirely. These weren't pleasure palaces, they were last resorts, built by communities who knew that the next raid could arrive with the next harvest season. Geography became destiny. In the Caucasus Mountains, the Andes, the highlands of Ethiopia, the cliffs of Yemen, people looked up and made a calculation. If we can reach it, we can defend it. If we can defend it, we survive. But reaching it meant solving problems that would make modern engineers pause. How do you haul a 2-ton block up a vertical rock face? How do you hide the only path to your fortress while still using it every day? How do you build walls that grip the cliff even when the earth shakes? How do you store enough water to outlast a siege when every drop has to travel up 1,000 feet of stone? And perhaps the strangest question of all, how do you coordinate 50 workers on a cliff face where a single mistake means death? Using nothing but rope and gesture, they solved it. All of it. Then they deliberately forgot to write it down. The first trick was the anchor line system, and it started with a problem that seemed absolute: gravity. Stone doesn't float. Wood doesn't climb. Every building material had to travel up a cliff face so steep that in some places, if you dropped a rock, it wouldn't touch anything until it hit bottom. Modern construction uses cranes with hydraulic arms and steel cables rated for specific tonnage. Medieval builders had hemp rope that rotted in rain, wooden pulleys that cracked under strain, and the constant knowledge that if a line snapped, someone died. The technique they developed was brutal in its simplicity. They didn't fight gravity. They used it. Workers would climb to the top of the cliff first, finding natural stone formations or drilling anchor points into the bedrock itself. From these anchors, they'd lower multiple rope lines, creating a vertical highway of fiber. But here's the part nobody expects. They didn't try to pull stones straight up. Instead, they built a relay system. Every 100 feet of cliff face became a station. A team of workers would occupy a ledge, no matter how narrow, anchored to the rock with safety lines. The stone block would be hauled to the first ledge using counterweights, rocks, and sandbags on the other end of the rope, providing mechanical advantage. Once at the ledge, the team would rest, check the ropes, and prepare for the next stage. Then they'd do it again. And again. A stone that took 5 minutes to quarry might take 3 days to reach the fortress. The risk was mathematical. Every rope had a breaking point. Every pulley could seize. Every ledge could crumble. Archaeological evidence from some sites shows anchor points that failed. The rope marks still visible in the stone. worn grooves that end abruptly where the system collapsed. But here's what they never explained. How did they protect the ropes themselves? Hemp fibers degrade in sunlight. They fray against rough stone. Modern recreations of this technique show ropes failing within weeks of constant use. These fortresses took years to build. Something else was happening. Some treatment, some wrapping technique, some knowledge lost in the space between then and now. The second technique was the hidden access system, and it began with a paradox. A fortress needs an entrance, but an entrance is a weakness. Enemies can follow the same path you use to bring in water, food, and people. Make the entrance too obvious, and you've handed your attackers a target. Make it too hidden, and your own people can't use it during an emergency. The solution was to make the entrance temporary, not a secret passage. That's too simple. They built access routes that existed only when the defenders wanted them to exist. Imagine a cliff face with a series of carved footholds. From a distance, they look like natural erosion. They spiral up the stone in a pattern that seems random, but when you're standing at the base, looking up, you realize something. The gaps between the footholds are too wide. No one can climb this. The human body can't stretch that far, unless there's a ladder, not a permanent ladder. A rope ladder, or a series of wooden poles stored inside the fortress and lowered only when needed. Once pulled back up, the cliff becomes unclimbable. The footholds are useless. The path disappears. Some fortresses used multiple systems layered together. The visible path would lead to a false entrance, a dead end carved into the cliff face, complete with a door that opened onto nothing but a 100-foot drop. The real path would split off at an earlier point, marked by a stone that looked fixed but could actually pivot, revealing a narrow gap. In practice, this meant defenders could watch attackers exhaust themselves climbing to a fake entrance while supplies and reinforcements moved through the real one unseen. The risk was in the knowledge itself. Every person who knew the true path was a vulnerability. If captured, if tortured, if bribed, they could reveal the route. Some historians suggest this is why certain fortresses show evidence of deliberately complicated systems that required multiple people to navigate. No single person held complete knowledge, the mystery that lingers. Some cliff fortresses show footholds and anchor points that don't align with any entrance, real or false. They lead nowhere. Were they decoys, abandoned plans, or something else entirely? Purposes we can't decode because we've lost the context? The third technique was dry stone engineering, and it solved a problem older than the fortresses themselves. How do you build on a surface that moves? Cliffs aren't stable. The earth shifts. Rockslides tear away sections of mountainside. Earthquakes turn solid stone into rubble. And yet, some of these fortresses have stood for 800 years, gripping cliffs that have shed layers of rock around them. The secret was building without mortar. Modern construction uses cement, bonding agents, materials that dry into a single rigid structure. When that structure fails, it fails catastrophically. A crack spreads. Water seeps in, freezes, expands. The whole wall comes down. Medieval builders took the opposite approach. They cut stones so precisely that they didn't need mortar. Each block was shaped to interlock with its neighbors, creating walls that were actually thousands of separate pieces working together. When the earth moved, the wall moved with it. The stones would shift slightly, grinding against each other, redistributing weight and stress. Then they'd settle back into position. The wall would survive because it was never rigid to begin with. It breathed. The cutting required was insane by modern standards. Some stones show evidence of being measured and adjusted multiple times, chisel marks layered over each other where builders refined the shape until the fit was perfect. And they did this hanging off cliff faces, where dropping a stone meant losing it forever. But here's the trade-off. Dry stone walls are only as strong as their weakest block. Pull out one key stone, and the whole section can collapse like a puzzle coming apart. Defenders had to know which stones were structural and which were merely fill. Attackers had to figure it out. Some walls show deliberate variations in the pattern. Stones placed slightly off-angle, creating optical illusions that make it hard to judge which sections are load-bearing. It's defensive architecture that works on a psychological level. The lingering mystery is in the tools. The precision required to cut stone this accurately usually demands measuring instruments, templates, mathematical calculations. Archaeologists find the walls. They don't find evidence of the tools or techniques that made them possible. It's as if the walls carved themselves. The fourth technique was the water strategy. And it started with the most basic equation. Humans need water to survive. At ground level, that's not a problem. You build near a river, dig a well, collect rain. But 1,500 feet up a cliff, every drop is a logistical nightmare. An adult needs roughly half a gallon per day just to survive. A fortress housing 50 people needs 25 gallons daily. A siege could last months. Do the math. That's thousands of gallons that somehow need to exist on a cliff where water doesn't naturally flow. The technique they developed was architectural, but it was also deeply psychological. First, the physical. Cisterns carved directly into the bedrock. Not tanks built on top of stone, but chambers hollowed out inside the mountain itself. Some of these cisterns could hold thousands of gallons, fed by channels that caught rainwater and morning condensation. The channels were barely visible, carved into the rock face at angles that made the water flow naturally, using gravity instead of pumps. But collection was only half the problem. Storage meant evaporation, contamination, algae growth. These cisterns often had narrow openings covered with stone slabs, keeping the water in darkness and limiting surface area. Some show evidence of multiple chambers, separating drinking water from water used for other purposes. Then there's the part that required discipline, rationing. Water had to last. That meant every activity was calculated. Cooking without open flames that required water for safety. Cleaning methods that used sand and scraping instead of washing. Even human waste management had to consider water conservation. Evidence suggests some fortresses used rendering fat from animals to create seal coatings for storage vessels, reducing evaporation. Others show remnants of salt preservation techniques for food that minimize the need for water in preparation. The psychological element was just as crucial. During a siege, watching your water supply dwindle creates panic. The knowledge that reinforcements might not arrive, that the next drink might be your last portion, that breaks discipline faster than any attack. Some fortresses built false cisterns, visible from outside, smaller than the real reserves. Let the attackers think you're running out. Let them wait for thirst to do their work. Meanwhile, the real supply stays hidden. The unanswered question: how did they prevent poisoning? A single infiltrator with access to the water supply could end a siege instantly. Some cisterns show evidence of multiple access points, each requiring different keys or knowledge to open. But that raises another problem. During a crisis, when you need water fast, complexity kills. Somewhere in the design, there had to be a balance between security and accessibility. We can see the cisterns. We can't see how they managed that balance. The fifth technique was labor organization, and it's the most invisible of all. You don't build a fortress alone. You need teams of workers, dozens of people operating in coordination on a vertical surface where communication is nearly impossible. Shout up a cliff face, and the wind eats your words. Use hand signals, and half the team can't see you because they're around a corner of rock. One mistake, one miscommunication, and someone falls. Or a rope snaps, or a stone drops and kills everyone below. And yet, they built these places. Which means they solved the communication problem in ways we're only beginning to understand. The evidence comes from the structures themselves. Many fortresses show work marks, carved symbols in stone that appear at regular intervals, not decorative, too consistent for that. More like notation, markers that indicated specific information to the work crews. Some researchers suggest these marks corresponded to rope lengths, to the height of certain lifts, to team assignments. A worker arriving at a section of wall would see the mark and know exactly what size stone was needed, how it should be oriented, where it fit in the overall structure. But symbols only work if everyone reads them the same way. That means training. That means a system of knowledge passed between workers, probably through apprenticeship and direct demonstration. Then there's the question of rhythm. Modern construction often uses steady, rhythmic work to coordinate teams. Think of sea shanties sailors used to synchronize rowing. Some historians believe cliff fortress builders used similar techniques, chants or drum patterns that carried better than shouting, that told workers when to pull ropes, when to set stones, when to pause. The archaeological record shows something else. Evidence of simple machines, wooden cranes and lever systems anchored to the cliff. These would have multiplied force, allowing smaller teams to move larger loads. But setting up these machines on a cliff requires perfect timing and coordination. You can't just assemble a crane on a narrow ledge if half the parts are still being hauled up the mountain. The work had to be choreographed like a performance, each team knowing their role, each action flowing into the next. The risk was cumulative. The more complex the system, the more points of failure. One team falling behind throws off the entire sequence. One injury reduces capacity. One storm forces everyone to stop while ropes and materials are exposed to the elements. And here's what we'll never fully recover: the social structure that made it work. Who led these projects? How were workers selected? What happened when someone made a mistake? The fortresses remain. The human systems that built them are silent. Stand at the base of one of these fortresses today, and the first thing you feel is vertigo. The second thing is humility. We live in an age of precision, computer modeling, stress analysis, safety regulations written in blood from every previous mistake. We build taller and faster, but we build with the assumption that if something goes wrong, there's a backup system, a redundancy, a way to pause and recalculate. The people who built these fortresses had no backup systems. They had rope and stone and the knowledge that failure meant death, not just for the worker who fell, but potentially for the entire community if the fortress wasn't completed before the next raid arrived. What they developed wasn't just engineering. It was a philosophy. Solve problems with what you have, not with what you wish you had. They couldn't make gravity disappear, so they built relay systems. They couldn't make entrances secure, so they made them temporary. They couldn't make stone flexible, so they made walls that moved as a system. They couldn't make water appear, so they captured every drop with architectural precision. They couldn't make communication easy, so they built languages of symbols and rhythm. Every technique was a negotiation with limitation. And perhaps that's the real lesson. In an age where we're constantly told that innovation means breaking barriers, these fortresses remind us that sometimes genius is working within constraints so completely that you turn the limitation itself into an advantage. The cliff isn't an obstacle. It's the defense. The wind still cuts across the cliff face. The fortress still stands. Stones locked together by nothing but precision and weight, gripping the mountain like it grew there. 1,500 feet below, the valley has changed. The raiders are gone. The reasons for building here have faded into history, but the techniques, the lost methods that made this possible, they're still here. Carved into stone, hidden in the patterns of chisel marks, written in the language of footholds that lead nowhere and everywhere at once. We've forgotten how to read it, but every stone remembers what it took to climb.